Nosferatu was directed by F.W. Murnau and is perhaps one of the most famous silent films ever made, still being shown regularly at festivals and even at cinemas with new soundtracks. The film is a loose adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula novel written in 1897 and follows the character Hutter, who is our Jonathan Harker stand-in, as he travels to the Carpathian Mountains to sell a property to the reclusive and mysterious Count Orlok. Once there, Hutter comes to understand Orlok's true monstrous nature and must escape back to Visborg to protect his wife Ellen, who Orlok has taken an obsessive interest in. With this film, Murnau tackles themes of mortality, sacrifice, sexuality, and even xenophobia. I love this film. It was one of the first silent films I ever saw, and I think the music from the Masters of Cinema release is just sublime. So it'll always have a special place for me. That being said, I don't think it's the all-time masterpiece some critics and scholars tout it to be. There are glaring pacing issues, there are lengthy sections where we're introduced to characters who we don't know and don't care about, where the central ones are sidelined. A good example can be seen with the cuts to Professor Bulwer's character when he's just teaching university students and making slight reference to the connection between wildlife and vampires. Which, yes, I understand what's being said. It's trying to reframe vampires as fitting into this world, make them feel more naturalistic and thus more like the embodiment of plague and disease. The themes are interesting, but the way in which it's presented is not succinctly embedded into the overarching story. This is an issue I have with many of Murnau's silent films. Just as a side point, Nosferatu as a word which today is associated with vampire, but interestingly, that's not really what it means. It may derive from a misinterpretation of a Romanian word like Nosferit, I'm not really sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, meaning insufferable or offensive. Bram Stoker used the term in his novel, which helped spread it, but it wasn't actually a real Romanian folkloric term. Getting back on track, another problem is that some of the acting can be distractingly bad and over-exaggerated at times. Like when Hutter is being chased by Orlok, it's meant to be a tense, slow build-up, and he literally hides under the covers. Again, thematically, it's trying to present Hutter as a frightened child, which links to his almost childish relationship with his wife because of the way they act around each other and the fact that she's a virgin, but it looks ridiculous and removes tension from the scene. Again, thematically, it's great, but it doesn't always translate to a cohesive narrative, especially from a modern audience's perspective. Another example can be seen when Ellen's reading the book on vampire lore later in the film. She reads, then dramatically twists her body in a way that distracts from this impending sense of dread that all the scenes with coffins are trying to cultivate. Basically, most of Ellen's acting is pretty artificial and weak, even considering the context in which the film was made, it being not only a silent film where the acting styles were generally a bit more exaggerated, but also a German expressionist film. Now, you may be wondering, what is German expressionism? It's an early 20th century artistic movement that rejected realism and instead used exaggerated, distorted visuals to express inner emotions, psychological states, and social anxieties. It emerged in Germany after World War I, and filmmakers used it to express themes that realism simply couldn't capture by itself. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is probably the most famous example, as it embodies this approach in every aspect of its production. It's not the same in Nosferatu. This expressionist style is more concentrated in the singular figure of Count Orlok, with hints of the style expressed in the acting and some of the sets. But in this sense, it works tremendously to present Orlok as distinctly other and ethereal, so that every second he's on screen, it's an iconic moment that could be screenshotted and used as a phone background. It's impressive the character manages to induce such a strong presence, given that he only has about 10 minutes of screen time in the whole film. That's something that is shared with the original novel. Dracula in the book really doesn't appear that much outside the opening chapters, but you can feel his presence pervade every page. Let's talk about that ending. For the most part, I think it is very well done. The part where Ellen does actually die to save everyone, and all the other characters are just useless bystanders to this event. Hutter doesn't do anything, the professors, the police don't do anything. It's a pretty powerful feminist theme, given the time of release. Most female acting roles at this point didn't usually have much agency, with some exceptions of course that we'll be tackling at a later date. The score does a lot of the heavy lifting in those closing moments to help the audience empathise with the situation. This is the Masters of Cinema release I'm talking about specifically, that is arranged from the surviving fragments of the original score to the film. The melodies are just delightful in a way that most modern film soundtracks don't capture. It really does make it feel like a symphony of horror. I could easily listen to this soundtrack on its own. Some of the shortcomings, unfortunately, come in some of the earlier scenes with Orlok and Hutter in the castle, where they lack a synchronicity between what's happening on screen and what's happening with the music. This is something that you tend to get with earlier silent film music, mostly due to time constraints on the composer's part. Films were made much more quickly at this point, composers usually only having a couple of weeks to create over an hour of material. It's just another feature that detracts from the immediate sense of tension and horror in these scenes. But at the end of the film, that final vampire attack, there's a great sense of synchronization. There's a few examples of Mickey Mousing, for those who know what that is, and it's really quite effective. So from a contemporary viewer's perspective, it's a little bit lacking in what we might expect from a score in terms of signifying and heightening emotion in a scene-by-scene basis, but it's fantastic overall from a purely musical standpoint. If that's not your thing though, this film has a massive variety of alternative scores, most of them available on YouTube, thankfully. This is one of the most repeatedly shown silent films in modern day, so there are styles of music accompaniment for everyone, regardless of what your film or music sensibilities are. That's one of the reasons I suggest people to watch this as one of their first silent films. If you want something that's a bit more modern film music inspired, but still want that classic orchestral sound, I'd suggest the BFI release. They have a score by James Bernard, who did many of the Hammer horror films in the 50s, 60s and 70s. It lacks some of the subtler moments when compared to that original score, but it's more synchronous with the on-screen visuals, especially during the horror scenes. If you're after a more creepy classic organ accompaniment, there's one by Sonus Mirabilis. If you want something that discards any semblance of classic orchestration altogether and just does its own thing, there are so many synth, electronic, rock soundtracks available. Some of the more notable ones are Invincible Czars, Fossils of Rock, Midnight's Edge. I'll link all of these in the description below. My personal favourite score is the Masters of Cinema release by Hans Erdmann, but you can approach this film from any perspective you want. It's got a lot to offer from a scholarly perspective, but also from an entertainment perspective. It's not perfect, but it's too iconic to ignore. On my silent film rating scale, I'd give it a 4 out of 5. It's an excellent bit of classic cinema. Thematically, there's so much to dig into and analyse. In this review, I've only scratched the surface. I mean, some people think Count Orlok can be used as a coded reflection of Murnau's homosexuality, but you can read about that in other texts or see it in other YouTube videos if you're interested in that side of things. Its issues mainly lie in its sometimes incohesive narrative, where the disparate elements don't always come together from a modern audience's perspective. Nevertheless, I would of course advise you to go and see this film, whether at home or with a live performer. Those experiences can be remarkably unique. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.